Hi, my name is Melissa, and welcome to a Merchant Center troubleshooting training organized by Us Nordics. So a little bit about myself. My name is Melissa. I work in Google Technical Solutions, so more in like online strategy and the technical troubleshooting part of that organization. And so I'm just here to basically give you some tips on Merchant Center, the most common issues that we usually face with Merchant Center, and then also to kind of how to troubleshoot those, and if there are any issues, to kind of get rid of those issues as soon as possible. So we would avoid any bad consequences there. So to start with that, basically how I'm gonna talk about this, I'm gonna divide it into a bit of the account and feed and item level issues, and then we're just gonna have a quick look at how Merchant Center works with AdWords. But then there is another session coming up on Friday that is then a bit more on the optimization side. So today we're going to look into a tiny bit more on the technical side of Merchant Center and how it works. So as learning objectives here, basically I would just basically go through the tools of how to ensure that you can have a very customer-friendly, secure and easy purchase process that is also crucial for any brand. So basically making sure that the shopping campaigns are running smoothly, there's correct information there, and it also offers a great experience for any of the users that end up clicking your ads. In addition to that, we want to take that also a bit further in the sense that we want to also, I would like to share some knowledge and some tips on how to basically empower you to kind of solve those issues a tiny bit yourself as well. A lot of the issues with Merchant Center are come down to very basics of how, for example, a website works, and if all the attributes, for instance, are correctly set up in the feed. So we're just going to have a quick look at that and the most common issues that we kind of face with, we encounter with that with my team, for instance. And then, of course, what's probably also in your mind a lot of times is that easily, for example, account reviews can take a tiny bit of time. So we kind of want to just highlight what the process there is behind, what is essential for an account to be reviewed and approved. So then also we could basically get those accounts up and running as soon as possible and get the campaigns also running smoothly so that we can make absolutely all the use of those campaigns. All right. So, like I said, we're going to talk a bit about the account level first, and then the feed level issues, and then we're going to dive into the more granular things, so basically to the item level issues after that. And then we're just going to have a really quick look at what is going on with shopping campaigns and AdWords. So basically what you kind of need to keep in mind when you start up shopping campaigns in the sense of bringing that data from Merchant Center to AdWords. So let's get started. So when it comes to account level issues and suspensions, the most common ones that we see are usually related to basically the checkout process or just the information that there is about the online store. And the key to that, the whole kind of overarching idea there is that we just want to make sure that the experience for every single user is customer friendly, it's secure, and it is a very easy purchase process for them. As that is important for the experience that also the customers would get from the ad. So in some cases, I understand that it can be very frustrating in terms of all the tiny details and things that you might face with when you are putting up a Merchant Center account and shopping campaigns. There are a lot of different policies to kind of comply to, but it's all just to have that in mind that also basically your brand is protected in the process. So let's look at a tiny bit all those different suspensions that we usually see, the most common ones and the ones that we actually get questions the most of, so that then we can kind of see what do they actually mean in real terms, and how you could basically start troubleshooting them. So the most important thing to even start with a Merchant Center account is to implement the HTTPS for the checkout page or the site. So basically, we just want to make sure that the site is as secure as possible, and HTTPS basically refers to an SSL certificate on the site, which allows then a bit more secure process. And this is a pretty easy fix in a sense. So basically just getting the SSL certificate either only for the checkout page or then for the whole site. Usually most of the clients, and we would also recommend to get it for the whole site to kind of avoid any issues with that, but also that it just overall it offers a better experience. And in fact, even in Google organic results, for example, if a site is properly protected, it will actually also improve your organic results nowadays. So it's important to put focus on the website security in general, and even more than when it comes to Merchant Center, as we're a bit more strict in that sense. So basically, it's applying that SSL certificate, and so in normal terms, basically coming from HTTP to HTTPS. And so how do you solve that? Basically, it's implementing that certificate on the site, and then asking for an account review. So basically, it's sending a form for us. I have the link a bit later on, and it will be also attached on the slides so that you can access it a bit later on. But you can also find that from the Merchant Center. If you just look for account review or suspended account, you will get a link to that same review request. So basically, then it's contacting us and then asking for a review, basically saying that now the SSL certificate has been implemented. So basically, that means that when an account suspension is due to checkout being unsecure, it refers about 99.9% of the time, it is just the SSL certificate that is missing from there. So that is a very easy fix and a quick thing to check yourselves as well. Perfect. And so then to kind of the second part of that, so kind of like other issues with the URL itself. So we see that, for example, like that HTTPS, for instance, or lack of HTTPS might cause those problems. But then there are some further issues as well that can come with a URL. And I understand that that is a tiny bit more technical and not everyone has that kind of knowledge. So I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible so that then at least if not you, then you would be able to tell what the issue is, for example, to a webmaster or any developer that you have within your reach. So a lot of the issues with URL that we see with Merchant Center is just basically claiming and verifying of the URL. For example, if we see that there is a client that has been using a Merchant Center before, so let's say that there is one agency that has started a Merchant Center account for a client, and the account is moving from that client to from that agency to another agency. It can be that, for example, as the claim was done before, it might be that that claim, for instance, was done like, let's say, for example, a top domain level or just any kind of like level down from there. So basically top domain, meaning that it will be example.com instead of www.example.com. So if you basically get an error message of not being able to claim a URL, always good to use a top domain. So just use then, for example, example.com when you're trying to claim the domain. And in that way, as that would be the kind of the highest possible claim that you could do, you could get the website then claimed and verified via that. So that's a good little tip of that. And that's the thing, like basically when it comes to verification and claiming and where this issue usually comes from, is that the URL can be claimed by one person at a time. And that basically means that there also can be only one Merchant Center account per URL, per domain. So this is the reason why, for instance, there can be those like claiming issues if there have been accounts before. So it might give you a warning that there is another account that has had this site claimed a bit before. So yes, indeed. So basically trying the top domain instead of the kind of extended top domain, I would say. So that's a very easy fix for that. And then, of course, one of the most common ones is that the URL is just not available globally. So that might also cause different kinds of URL issues. So the same rule and the policy applies to actually all of Google's marketing products. So in order to advertise in AdWords or on YouTube or like to whatever marketing, the URL has to be available globally in absolutely every location on every device without any blocking of any sort. So for that, there are really good free tools online that you can use. And even I use those myself. When I look into sites and I try to figure out what might be wrong, for example, with a URL that is not getting approved. So there are trends such as GeoPeeker and Uptrends that basically just give you an overview of, for example, if there are any HTTP errors, so basically any loading errors, or if, for example, there is some kind of a geo-block of any sort on the site. So those all would need to be removed in order for the site to be also running properly with Merchant Center. So those are great tools. Also a great tip for any kind of URL. If you have any problems with any URLs, if it's ads or in general organic results, whatever the problem would be, all those availability tools are a great way to kind of start troubleshooting a tiny bit. As basically you just going to a website might not tell the whole truth, as that will be only one device and one location at a time. And we kind of looked at a bit more holistically. All right. So then one really common one that we face actually in the Nordics is that there is a suspension for no online purchasing means. So basically that means that it's like make sure that every business and individual can proceed through the checkout everywhere and on every device. So kind of going back to the same idea of the URL. So that meaning that there is a whole range of purchase options, and those options are not limited to any of the users. So in light of that, basically, there are a few exceptions in the Nordics. Probably if there's any one of you is from Denmark, you are very aware of this, for instance. So there are a few exceptions to that. So for example, there needs to be a home delivery option in Denmark. So I know that it's not necessarily what you would always prefer to have there, or even the customers would prefer to have there. However, the policy and the kind of regulation around that is that there has to be a home delivery option in Denmark. So unfortunately, it just has to be there in order for us to be able to even review and approve the account. So that's something that definitely check out if you get this kind of warning at all. That is the most common that we see kind of popping up in Denmark. And it is also very country specific regulation. That's why also you might not see a reference to that, for example, in the help center at the moment. So it's a bit unfortunate, but basically that's the main point to kind of keep in mind when setting up any Merchant Center account in targeting Denmark, basically. So yeah, so it's the same as like verifying the checkout process in general. So exactly that on every device without any geo-blocking, that there's no IP blocking either. So basically everyone could access the site absolutely equally. And then also a part of that is that there are all the options for payment are available in the checkout process. So basically straight away as a user lands on the site to a product page, basically they could get a very good idea of what the payment methods are straight from the beginning. So that meaning, for example, the payment options would be Visa, MasterCard, etc. And that needs to be part of the checkout process as well. So it needs to be there, very visible. Also with basically the home delivery option, for instance, in Denmark. In Norway and Sweden, there is no home delivery, there's no obligation to have home delivery, but the delivery services have to be mentioned on the site. So basically there are a few different delivery services. So whatever those, if for example you would like to choose one delivery service and have one specific pickup point, those would kind of have to be mentioned somewhere on the site as well. So having those names there basically changes the whole situation, and you can ask for an account review there. In addition to that, so kind of the overarching idea of no online purchasing means is that everyone should be able to proceed through the checkouts and be able to do the purchase, knowing exactly what they're kind of, how the purchase is going to be done. So payment methods, but also how they're going to get the product in their hands, and then that they can even basically physically even click the button. So for example, if the pay button would be somewhere very hidden, sometimes I've seen, for example, a bit weird pop-ups coming up that you would like kind of confirm the pay. Those might also be a bit tricky when it comes to working properly on all devices and on all browsers. So in that case, like basically the pay button just needs to be very accessible and easy to find, very visible on the site. And it needs to be also clear that that is for basically paying of the whole purchase. So that's kind of was more for the general policy part of how do we think about the checkout process. But then it comes to also a bit more technical details of the whole checkout process. So basically, that comes to kind of the coding of the site in a sense. So sometimes we see, for instance, that some kind of buttons would disappear in other countries. It's a bit weird. There is some kind of geo-blocking of some sort. So it is basically making just sure that there is technically nothing wrong. So basically there's no need to refresh or try again. Basically the flow technically would be as smooth as possible. So the other one being no online purchasing means it's more about the information that is provided to you along the way, and like making that the most comfortable for the user. And then the checkout incomplete basically refers to the more technical part of the whole checkout process. So basically also getting confirmation of purchase. So having that confirmation, for example, popping up, thank you for your purchase, your delivery is on the way. That kind of confirmation in the end is what would also be needed there. So basically that is to make sure that technically nothing is going wrong with the checkout process and the purchase is done correctly until the end. Then one of the tricky ones that we usually end up having also long conversations about with clients is the return and refund policy. And there also the overarching idea comes down to, again, the customer experience. So the return and refund policy needs to be easily found and it needs to be very understandable. And it should not basically require you going through the return and refund policy several times in order for you to understand what it's saying. So we have a few questions here that we can kind of share and basically what the text should be including in order for the account and the return and refund policy to be approved. So the first question would be, what is the time frame to take advantage of the refund option? So for example, it's 30 days after purchase, or it is X amount of days after delivery to your door, or whatever the system is that works for you. There just needs to be a time frame so that you know exactly from which day and which hour basically start counting that timeline that you could do any kind of return or refund. In addition to that, who pays the shipping cost on returns? Is it free? So basically, that means that the store itself is paying for the return and refund. Are there different regulations when it comes to return and refund? So who's paying the shipping costs in those? Or is it the client themselves who is responsible of that? Then also, just in kind of practical sense, usually if I would go to a site and I would do a purchase, the most interesting I would be like, okay, so what do I actually need to do? So there might be a big sign of free, like a return and refund policy, return free for 30 days. But personally, as a user, I just want to know what do I need to do to get the product returned and to get my money back. So what are the exact steps? And here, I really recommend being as clear as possible because that will basically minimize all the issues that we'll ever have with it. So do they need to, for example, call you first? Do they need to email you first and basically notify that they are going to return a refund or refund a product? What is the reason for that, for instance? Do they have to notify that first? Is there a form on the site that they will need to fill in for that? All these different kinds of steps. And also what is, for example, the address that they need to deliver to, and if there's any information that should be also included with that whole package that they're sending back to you. Of course, then in addition to that, what is the policy for broken products? So if, for example, the product breaks during the delivery, how is that handled by you? Who is paying for the cost? What's the evidence that you would require, etc. Basically, what is like who is responsible if anything happens to the products on the way? And then, of course, so we have the two sides of that, so the return and refund. So what is the policy for products which are not broken, but the customer just wants to return because they just don't want the product anymore? So do you accept those, first of all? And who pays for the returns, the cost of returns? And are there any other policies that they should kind of keep in mind when they are also ordering the product? So, for example, or basically returning them to you. Should there be a note if there was an issue with the product? Whatever that kind of the system that you have there, or also depends on the product that you have. Basically, that just needs to be very clear-cut as well. And then, of course, one of the things that causes the most issues is the language. So, is the policy in the right language? So we quite often see that, for example, there is an eagerness to expand to German markets, and a lot of the German-speaking countries are a lot more strict in their return and refund policies. So that would need to be in the local language in order for basically the merchant center to be approved and to even have shopping basically there. So just check those language requirements very carefully. There's a good list of that in the merchant center help center as well. So if you just basically Google language requirements, Google merchant center, you should end up straight away to this big tricks, basically listing all the different currencies, languages per country. And those same languages are basically mean that what is the language of the return and refund policy then afterwards. So the overarching idea there is that it needs to be understandable. It needs to be customer friendly, and that's basically what we look at. And so these are the kind of few questions that we kind of keep in mind when we are reading through a policy. And then, of course, as from kind of my own personal experience, I would say, if it is something that is very borderline, so let's say that it is that the return and refund policy, it's a bit like it's not perfectly organized, let's say, but basically there are answers to these questions. In those cases, when you send an account for review, we may look at the account, we might look at the policy, like, okay, all the information is there, that is required, and then we might get the account for a review and get it unsuspended, and the account gets running. However, if it is very vague and there is any chance of like it being kind of the policy being not fully clear, there is the chance that you might face some issues with the account again for the exact same reason. And in those cases, I know that it can be extremely frustrating when you're getting the same suspension and you were basically unsuspended and approved for shopping before. So in these cases, I usually just say, just be as clear as possible and you will avoid any problems in the future as well. So basically, those are the biggest issues that we see coming up with merchant center suspensions. As you've probably seen as well, those are really basic things to check that you can also check without any sort of technical background whatsoever. You can also detect if there are any issues with the account or the website. And basically, when those, if you, for example, get that return and refund policy suspension, you look at those questions, you look at the policy, you look at the language, everything seems matching, then you are more than free to basically submit a form and basically ask for an account review. And so in those those requests, the more in detail that you're explaining what the issue was and how you fixed it, the more quickly as well in our end, we will be able to basically process that account review and we will basically get the account unsuspended. So as an idea for this, basically, is that we quite often see clients being a bit confused of what the issue is even for the suspension. So first, they would contact us about that. We would kind of tell the clients about what the issue there is, and then after that, they go fixing and then come back to us for an account review. So in that time, basically, the account is easily being basically suspended for several days already. So this is to kind of give you a small checklist that you can use as reference to kind of get that account unsuspended a tiny bit quicker. So for some businesses, that might be really crucial. So, all right. So then let's take a look at a bit the feed level issues. So basically, what can be done when troubleshooting the feeds? As a summary, Merchant Center is a data processing tool. So basically, Merchant Center doesn't really have any memory. It doesn't. It just processes basically the feed that you give to it, and then feeds that forward. Basically verifies that everything's okay in terms of policies and other rules we might have, and then brings it forward, for example, to AdWords, so that then you can do marketing with that. So having that in mind, basically, what is a feed? So a feed is then the parts that you bring. Basically, you bring the data to Merchant Center with the feed. So if there are some problems with the feed, usually it's in kind of the feed itself and the kind of source of the feed, rather than the Merchant Center itself. So for that as well, you might be using also some kind of third-party tools for basically creating the feed. If there are issues in terms of reading the feed in Merchant Center end, the first place to go and check is always, okay, let's go to the original file or the original feed. What is going on there? Are there any errors there? And so nowadays, actually, there is a really good place in Merchant Center as well to kind of use for checking all these different errors. So when you navigate to the products and feeds, and you just click a specific feed that you want to kind of take a look at, it actually lists all the different errors and even gives the specific line for that error and what the error is. So for example, missing attributes or like attributes that are not valid, that is a really good kind of checklist to have. And that's also easy to have as a reference when you then go to the original feed and try to basically fix that and then get it re-uploaded to Merchant Center. And so basically when you've done those corrections to the feed, it's always just good to re-upload it on the account, and that basically solves any of those feed issues. Of course, there are some more specific, there might be some more specific and complex feed issues. So for example, if you're creating a feed for the first time, there might be some problems with that. Of course, feel free to always basically send us an email or call us if you have any of those issues, but just first, we would always, like from our end, that's the first thing that we would refer to. Okay, have you checked that the original file is also correct and everything's all right there? The reason for that is also that we cannot access the feeds, so we don't necessarily see what's in the feed. Depends a bit on your system as well. So for us to be able to troubleshoot a feed, it's not really what we can do easily. So then that comes to kind of also your system and how that has been set up in your end and making sure that everything's correct there. All right. So basically when it comes to feeds, that's pretty straightforward for that. If some issues persist and you wish to basically get some kind of a review, or if there's a specific feed issue and you've read that, you should basically contact us as well. There are those kind of very specific rare cases. Of course, submit a form, explain the issue, give a name of the feed that you're having issues with, and then we can get back to you with a bit more results and answers, hopefully. And so then as the kind of last part when it comes to the Merchant Center structure itself, the item level issues. So this is something that probably causes the most headache, as it goes into a tiny bit onto nitty-gritty details of the feeds and of the products and basically everything that there is on Merchant Center. So we're going to take a look at also the few of the most common issues that we see there, and basically how to troubleshoot those. Those are great reference point to also a lot of the other issues. But basically in general for item level issues, it's good to reference straight away the attributes. There is a good article also on the Merchant Center Help Center about the different attributes and what they should be including. So that's a great a reference point for the very, very technical details. So exactly how numbers should be formatted, how currency should be formatted, all that kind of stuff can be found from there. So yeah. So basically what the whole idea and why we're also very careful when it comes to the item level issues is that we want to offer a good customer experience by having really good basically ads that also offer the correct information as opposed to the landing page, for instance. And then as a result of that, of course, we want to ensure your return on investment. So basically also ensuring that whenever a user clicks an ad, they end up to a product page, all the information is corresponding, everything's in line, and then basically they will also end up doing a purchase. Whereas then if there's any kind of misalignment with that information, that might also hurt, basically cause the customer just to leave the site, not trust the site, might hurt the brand. So we're just kind of trying to protect there also the customer and your brand as well. So yeah, so let's look at the images first. So missing or invalid images is a pretty common item level issue that we see. And basically with that, the images have to be on a white background and the images need to be accessible. So here we kind of bump into the same kind of URL problems as I've mentioned before when it comes to the whole site, but also, yeah, for the whole site basically, and the checkouts. So basically there we would check for the same issues. So usually for the photo, the image, there's a separate link for that. So kind of a folder that you're getting the photo from. And we would test that link the same way as we would do with any other URLs. So basically looking into, so you could use the website availability tools, GeoPeeker, all these different tools to kind of test if there are any HTTP errors. So for example, the file doesn't exist. So for example, the page does not exist at all. So it would give you a 404, for instance. All these kind of things you would be quite easily be able to detect with those kind of website availability tools. And also with that, the same kind of rule applies that it needs to be open for everybody. So even if you'd be working in one destination, if it's not globally available, it won't be able to run either. In addition to that, there's basically a robots.txt file. Sorry, this goes a bit more technical as well. I'm not sure how savvy you necessarily are, but basically there is a robots.txt file on each URL as well. Basically with that, you can determine how different crawlers can access a site, and so basically how our different robots and systems can access the site. And basically that access needs to be there in order for us to be even able to detect that image and to pick it up from that URL. So a good way is also to check if there is one. So basically it's adding to the end of the URLs as robots.txt. If nothing happens, basically it just runs to the same site. There's no robots.txt flag. That's good. Basically there's no problem then with that, and it's allowing all access. If there is a file, then it will be important to make sure that there is access to the Google bots crawlers. So this is something that you can, again, if there would be this kind of an issue, you'll be able to detect that by just trying the robots.txt in the end of the URL. And then you could basically refer that to any developer or webmaster and kind of try to work with them with solving the issue, basically. The same robots.txt file tip applies to absolutely every other URL when it comes to ads, when it comes to any domains, basically. So just keep that in mind as a good tip to make sure that everything is visible to everybody. In addition to that, the images on Merchant Center have to be on a white background, and they need to be the correct size. So all that technical detail actually can be found from the Merchant Center, from the Help Center as well. But here is just a quick overview of that. So for apparel and for all other products, just as a small reference if you're not aware of that yet. Yeah. And so with this, it's a bit more specific when it comes to item level kind of product reviews. So if you have issues with any image URLs, first it will be to go and fix those URLs. So basically do all the checks, make sure that that image is available from the link that you're providing in the feed. And then Basically, it's also re-uploading the feed, and it can take up to 4 days for those products to be then available and those images to be available. So it takes always a longer while when it comes to crawling of images. However, if the image URLs are not changed, there must be a mistake in the slides themselves, but basically if the image URLs are not changed, and there's no kind of recrawling to be done. So basically, the same URL applies. You just fixed the URL in the kind of website end, and then nothing is done to the feed. So there's no fetching, no re-uploading of the feed or anything. Then it might take even up to 6 weeks. So this all can be found from the Help Center. But those just like to have in mind that if it's very urgent, it's always good to go and also re-upload the feed every single time there are any fixes you're doing to the products, because that will always, no matter, it's not only for images, but for all different attributes, that kind of enables for the products to go live as soon as possible. Then something that might feel a bit confusing for some who are starting with Merchant Center for the first time. So there's basically a requirement that there needs to be an identifier for every single product. And so basically that means that with a product identifier, we can kind of make sure that if it's a unique product or if it is a product, for example, let's say Nike shoes, there might be a lot of different resellers of that. So we can kind of match that same product. So that black and white Nike shoe, we can see and track that. We know exactly that that is the same one in these different, three, four different web shops, for instance. So it's just to be able to us to identify a very specific product in our system as well. So basically for that, you would need to choose 2 of the 3 options. So there's a GTIN that is pretty common for that. So for any products, or then that's, for example, for books that will be ISBN as well. Then that would be a manufacturer part number, or then the brand name. So most commonly we would see the combination of GTIN and brand name together. So basically having as the GTIN, that's like a series of numbers that is provided also by the basically the when it's usually, for example, in the barcodes would be a GTIN, and that's the identifier that we use to even order those products to your store. So that same one would be used over here. So for checking that GTIN, exactly packaging, you can ask the manufacturer. Sometimes it might be a bit like there are more complex products, more unique products, so it might be a bit trickier. Also, you can do is that search products on just Google Shopping as well. You might find the same product and find the same, like exactly the same product provided by somebody else, and from there you could even see then the product identifier from there. Or then, for example, there are some online databases as well. So, for example, for ISBNs, there is like a web a database that you can kind of refer to, and that will help you then to get the right IDs there. So then also GTIN just consists only of numbers. So some might confuse that a bit like product ID, as product ID might be a combination of numbers and letters all over. GTIN is then just numbers, and it's something that kind of comes from, is a more official number that comes from the manufacturers, for instance. So just to keep that in mind. And there as well, it's just a matter of updating the information on the feed and then re-uploading the feed. And then within a day or two, basically those updates should be applied also on the Merchant Center account and on all the campaigns. And then we have a lot of issues also with prices we've seen. So basically, how Merchant Center works is that we look at the so-called web page microdata. And that's found on, for example, any product page that we go to. There's microdata on the site that basically sends information then also to Merchant Center. So when we look at the price and the price that we're going to show also on the ad, we look at what's in the microdata of the product page and what's on the feed. So Previously, that was basically a clear cut that all those need to match. So, and even in the website, actually, there might be two parts to it. So there might be the microdata part, and then there might be what's visually on the site. So sometimes even there is a mismatch in terms of the what's on the page visually, and when you go to the actual code of the site, there might be a completely different price. So basically, there was like 3 different things to check before a product would basically go live and be approved for price. So check for microdata, feed, and what's on the site. The troubleshooting of that is to, for example, to use structured data testing tool. So if you're using very standard implementation of microdata, for instance, that's something that you can use very easily. It's a structured data testing tool. So that you can find just by Googling structured data testing tool. And basically you there, for example, you could add a URL of a specific product and put that on the tool, and it will show you straight away what are the different attributes that are getting picked up from the site. So that's the absolute easiest way to take a look at what's being picked up without you knowing that much of any other technical details. So you will get that information easily from there. Then in addition to that, basically, when you go to Merchant Center and you go to a specific product and specific product page, you see there are 3 different options. So you see there, the very bottom one is the information that is being picked up from the site. The second one is what is found from the feed, so basically raw feed attributes. And then is the final price on the ads, basically. So those 3. And like I said, those would all need to match. If they don't match, and if you have issues with them usually not matching, there is an option nowadays to have so-called automatic item updates enabled on the account. I will talk a tiny bit more about that as an optimization tip on Friday. But basically, the automatic item updates, they kind of use the microdata information from the site as kind of the real truth. So instead of matching all those different components together, the automatic item updates would just pick up the price from the site and then feed that to Merchant Center. And then that would show up as the final attribute. So how you would see that on a product page is basically you would see the price picked up from the site, the raw feed attributes. They might be completely different prices there. And then you have the final attributes, and that will be exactly the same as the one that's being picked up from the site. So you can see all that data on just one product page, for instance. And for the automatic item updates, you can just enable that from the settings. So the top right corner of your Merchant Center account, in case you're interested to take a look at that before Friday. And yeah, and so what then sometimes confuses is exactly the visual. So sometimes there is a different implementation of how the actual price is shown on the site visually. So there might be even a mismatch. So it's just good to kind of check those as well as then when it comes to kind of the attributes that you see on the product page of the Merchant Center, those 3 different ones, they wouldn't take into account what's visually on the site. But the reason for the disapproval might as well be what's visually on the site. So if you see everything else being all right, just take a look at what's visually on the site and what's actually being picked up from the site, just to make sure that everything's correctly set up. Yeah, and then of course, for those who feel maybe a bit more adventurous, you can also look at, so instead of using just a structured data testing tool, for instance, you could also just right-click on any URL and click for view page source, and even just control find and try to find the price. So if you're, for example, on Merchant Center seeing a really weird price popping up as the one that's being picked up from the site, in those cases, I would just go straight to the URL of the product page. I would go to the source code and really control find, and I just try to find the price and see if it actually exists somewhere in the code. And so then I know that there's something wrong with the code and it should be fixed. In addition to that, when it comes to pricing, just always display the highest possible price for the minimum quantity that needs to be bought. So always include it with the VAT. So there might be some B2B businesses as well that you might be advertising for. When it comes to any of the products, it needs to be with a VAT. So when it comes to shopping, so basically the ultimate kind of highest price that you would end up paying for that. That's just to ensure basically that there are no kind of nasty surprises in the end of the checkout process. Yeah, and then also when it comes to, for example, bundles, so we get questions, quite a lot of those as well. So for example, if there's a minimum quantity of 10 pieces that need to be bought, the price on the feed and on the ads cannot be for one item if the minimum amount to be bought is 10 items. So then it needs to be the bundle price that also needs to be displayed kind of on the ad and in the pricing there. So of course, you could have on the website, you could freely say that, okay, with this quantity price, basically for one piece, it means it equals to X amount, there's no problem with that, as long as the kind of the checkout prices are always matching and there are no surprises in that. And so then quickly, kind of like the last catch up when it comes to item disapprovals is that we see a lot this called preemptive item disapprovals. So basically those are warnings on certain products. So instead of just like full on suspending the account immediately, we see some mismatching information. We just give a preemptive disapproval with a deadline until when it needs to be fixed. And if it's fixed, everything's all right. And then basically that preemptive item disapproval warning will just disappear also from the Merchant Center account. So how to troubleshoot this is that if you get preemptive item disapproval, definitely look into those straight away. There is, when you get that warning, it kind of comes with a yellow warning icon on Merchant Center. And right in the end of that line, when you look at diagnostics, for instance, you will be able to see like kind of a little speech bubble. And when you hover your mouse on top of that, you get the information like, okay, you have until the February 28th to resolve this issue, for instance. So that gives you kind of timeline that you can work with. And basically with that, look into what's wrong, where is a mismatch. So then using, for example, the tools when it comes to price or availability. So the same kind of structured data testing tools, etc., to make sure that all the information is correctly and corresponding with the feed, the site, and everything in between. And so when you can check those, and then you can just re-upload the feed. If everything's okay, the disapproval will just go away by itself. Of course, if there are some concerns and you're not 100% sure that something is has been corrected and there's no issue anymore, of course, in those cases, you can contact us with, for example, a form, and we will then be able to guide with that and basically say if we see any issues with a specific pricing issue, for instance. But otherwise, there's really not much that needs to be even done from your part. So in that sense, preemptive disapprovals are kind of an easy and nice disapproval, as there is a timeline for you and that you can work with, and there is no big kind of consequence to your whole account. And just re-uploading the feed, as always, with any kind of changes that are coming to the data. So as soon as you just upload the updated data, it will then take a couple of days basically for it to come into force. All right. So then as the last quick stop, just a few things about shopping and AdWords as a combination. So as said, Merchant Center is a data processing tool. And what matters is that the data in Merchant Center's end works, and then the AdWords settings are kind of aligned with that. So, for example, if there's, for some reason, we don't see, for example, shopping campaigns running, the first thing we check is like, okay, in the source, so there in the Merchant Center, are there any suspensions? Are there any disapprovals? Is there anything kind of preventing those items from even going all the way to AdWords? So that would be like the kind of first things that we would go to, like go to the source. So no feed level errors, no items, like all the items are approved. The URLs claimed and verified. Those would be the most important things to check. And then, of course, the target country in comparison to the target country in the AdWords campaign, for instance. So then a small checklist for AdWords. Of course, there are other things that like might come in your way as well. This is the first checklist, and I think we're going to talk about more about the AdWords settings and the campaign settings for shopping a tiny bit more on Friday. So stay tuned for that. First thing would be especially when you have many AdWords accounts and many Merchant Center accounts, there could be an honest mistake of using the wrong Merchant Center ID for an AdWords account. So just make sure that the correct account is linked to the correct account. A very simple thing to check. And then in addition to that, so basically how you get the products to AdWords and to the shopping campaigns is by connecting those two accounts together. But then in addition to that, there is an option for filters. So this is something that that you can use. So for example, you can set up, for example, custom filters on the feed. So you can basically group products together, and let's say that you have half the products that are generating a better revenue, and other ones that are not generating as good of a revenue. So you want to kind of split those in two and have them in two campaigns and prioritize them a tiny bit differently. So basically those could be set up with custom filters. Quite often we would see that there's a custom filter that is being used in an AdWords campaign that is not aligned with what's on the feed. So basically, just make sure that whenever you're using a filter, it's the same data set that is in Merchant Center that we're using for that. So if you're using any kind of filter, make sure that that filter is actually applicable to the data that you sent to Merchant Center. So if you just don't use filters at all, so you can also just use no filters at all, then it basically should go through and the product should basically arrive to AdWords completely fine. So it's for the case if you like to use this feature. And then, of course, for the basic check of the campaign, so the campaign has an ad group. It's a good thing to check. It has also product groups. So it could also have just basically all products as being like a product group, or you could separate that into different product groups as well. So there is a different different setups for that. But how you can basically check if there are products ready to serve. So basically also if you're using a filter, for instance, to see if products are actually going through that. If you go to the product groups and you kind of hover your mouse on top of for example, all products, you will see kind of data of how many products are ready to serve. So if you see products that are ready to serve, then basically all in terms of Merchant Center and AdWords linking should be okay. In terms of also the products being approved on Merchant Center, everything should be fine with that as well. So then it just more comes to like the AdWords optimization parts if, for example, the campaign wouldn't be working or running at all. So, but that's a simple check. Just in general for how to get the data all the way to AdWords. And then, of course, and that goes a bit more to the kind of optimization part, but what can really prevent a campaign from running from the very start is that the bids are not high enough. So especially if you're going to a new country where you haven't had shopping before, you might not be used to yet to the prices in specific kind of product group or categories or specific product items. So always have kind of higher bids in the beginning to make sure that the campaign starts running properly. Kind of emphasize this more. Of course, this all depends on like the bidding strategies that you're having as well. So if you're, for example, having an automated bidding strategy, that's also going to help you a lot already. But if you're doing any kind of bidding on the product group level, for instance, just make sure that the bids are high enough so that then the campaign can kind of get a good kickstart. And then after that, of course, you can adjust the bids a bit more depending on certain products, product groups, etc. But in the start, just have it high enough so that then also the campaign can kind of gather data of the whole market for those specific products and optimize how it is running in that network. Cool. So was waiting if there would be any questions, but I think we are. I'm just checking with my colleagues here if there are any questions at all. And if not that, then we're just gonna wait until Friday with some optimization tips. And so if you have any kind of questions regarding that, please feel free to reach out to us with those questions. You should have received an invite, so I'm sure in the invite there are also instructions on kind of asking those questions. So feel free to get back to us on those. I would be happy to answer those questions. And if you send them beforehand, I might have even time to prepare a bit. So, but if nothing else, I thank you very much for joining for this Merchant Center troubleshooting training. I hope you found it useful. And yeah, I'll see you on Friday, hopefully. Ciao.